And in the numbers squad,
run across the screen like chasing some movie.
Yeah.
oh, you are. Yes.
Everyone, we are streaming, and the sound is turned on, so anything you say will be streamed on YouTube. So, no cursing, please.
So no one task, no one run.
Well, you go.
You can go whenever you want.
Okay.
We need an on-air sign.
How do you mark that?
Like, you know, and they have in studios one of the light up on-air
That'd be
signs.
really cool, actually.
Yeah, I thought about doing one last semester, but I didn't know, like,
Here's the hairs over here.
Kind of plug it in.
you're fine.
All right, welcome to the new semester, everybody. Both those of you who are here physically, as well as those who are watching online. And Bill's going to tell us today about, we have a big mushroom cloud there, about what happens in this nightmare scenario, I guess.
Yeah.
Take it away, Bill.
Hi. Welcome. It's a new. Oh, it's a new semester in the beginning of the month, beginning of the academic year, and what I'm going to be describing is a project that we started last year. We've gotten a little over, maybe 5 quarters into now. I don't have all the answers, don't have very many answers at all, but I'm going to describe where we are now. Let's see. Okay. So these are the people who are doing the work. Tala Oz, who is not with us today at the moment because he is changing jobs. He got hired by a Palo Alto startup called Humanize, and he promises that he will finish his dissertation. Annetta has been with us for the year, and Xiao Yi is just joining us officially today or last Friday. And Andrew Cooks tries to keep me honest. Tries. So the things that you like today, these people did, the mistakes are all mine. Okay. So I'm going to describe why first. This is a 3-year project sponsored by the federal government, and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency is interested in this. And what they want, what they need, is they're the source of information, the technical source for the rest of the government. They are a bunch of physicists and engineers. They understand the physics behind all kinds of weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, nuclear, and anything else. But they recently, a year and a half or so ago, realized they didn't know anything about how people would react, and that's going to be a big part of it. So they want us to try to explain how people would react to a nuclear weapon. They were interested in, they wanted to go find a whole bunch of people, so they said, we want to see what the effects are in response to a nuclear weapon going off in a megacity. I'll describe what that means a little bit. They told us to point at the United States. It's not probably wise to be studying dropping nuclear weapons on other countries. That just doesn't seem quite appropriate. And they were interested only in the reaction, the first 30 days or so, not the long-term economic impacts, which have been studied in the past, but they want to see how the people run around. The fun part of working with these folks, and I recommend these people as bosses, is that they told us this is fundamental research. What they want from us is to advance science and students. They're not asking us for a model. They're asking us to publish papers, conferences, things like that, and promote student academic achievement, which is just perfect. What we want out of this, or what we're going to get out of this, is we're going to model a megacity for lots of reasons. Once we've got a megacity modeled, we can do lots of interesting things with that. We're also doing the social networks because that's going to be part of how the people respond. So we will have social networks for an entire megacity. We're going to model patterns of life, not just for Melody, but we're going to establish some baselines of how people behave before we set off a nuclear weapon and see how they react. And we get to play with some decision-making processes. That's my primary interest, of how people make those kinds of decisions. And we're going to be sponsoring some students. You saw this grant, almost all the money of this grant goes to supporting 2 students. So we may have underbid. Should have asked for more money. So what's a megacity? Start with the biggest city in the world. You guys have an idea who the biggest city in the world is? Shut up, Andrew. That's not fair. Tokyo. At 38 million people, or pushing 40 million, round number, 40 million people. How about number 2? Jakarta. At 31. Still really nice, good-sized numbers.
These metro areas?
Yes,
Okay.
it is not a narrow old city or something like that. It is the larger area. In fact, in the list, this is described as Greater Jakarta, but not Greater Tokyo. So number 3 is Seoul, Korea. You wouldn't need an intercontinental ballistic missile to hit Seoul, Korea. And then the list goes on. There are approximately 31 megacities. The definition of a megacity is more than 10 million people. So our first megacity comes in at New York at 20, a little over 20, pushing 25, depending on where you draw the outside boundaries. So we're going to be building a model of 25 million agents, 1-to-1 scale. Not all of them making decisions, not all of them living through the first couple of minutes. Los Angeles, the only other megacity in North America, comes in at 18.5. Chicago is just outside the limit of a megacity. Come on, draw the picture. Okay, so these are the megacities in the world as of 2016. There's our 2, and you see a whole bunch over in this area, which is what we had originally proposed before they told us, no, look at the United States, please. And now if I go to 2030 and go back and forth between these 2 carefully, no, go backwards. Go backwards, don't show off our stuff. Okay, so here's the changes. Colombia gets a megacity. So there's only one new one in the new world. And in the old world, there's some that are extended, enlarged. In Southern Africa, there are, do it again. There's a couple. But Japan is holding steady. Okay, so now let's go to those other pictures. Okay. So there's some choices that we get to make in doing this study. Major effects on the class and project, the size of the effort. Are we dealing with a terrorist weapon or a weapon between nation states? Many orders of magnitude between these kinds of things. The terrorist attack at Oklahoma City, McVeigh blew up a federal government building. That is described as effectively 5,000 pounds of TNT. Blew up a major building and had damages in 16 block around that. That was at 5,000 pounds of TNT, that's 2.5 tons. So that's a 2.5 KT explosion. 100 years ago, we had a 3 kiloton explosion in Halifax. Munitions headed off to World War I. 2 ships collided in the harbor, started a fire, and eventually leveled the harbor city area around that. 100 years ago this year. So we're looking at something relatively small. The options are something relatively small. North Korea has had some small nuclear explosions that they've generated in the last 10 years now or so. And so we've set our range to be in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 kilotons. That's twice Oklahoma City to 4 times Oklahoma City. That's when we're going to use, not 100 megatons, because then we'd be modeling all of New England and more. Okay, so step down. So we're going to talk a small, relatively small in a nuclear sense, 5 to 10 kilotons. This is still unclassified, and I don't know anything other than unclassified information, but I suspect this is the kind of thing that could be carried in a truck vehicle of some kind. Ground burst or air burst. Big difference in the physics and the effects. An air burst, the explosion occurs relatively high, potentially hundreds of kilometers high to be an air burst, and it has a very large electromagnetic pulse, electrical effect, but no fallout. If it's an air burst, what it irradiates, what it activates is air. Air blows around, nothing falls down to the ground. So there's not as much effect on people. Both Nagasaki and Hiroshima were air bursts, but they were relatively low to the ground, so they did have fallout as a result, because their fireball did get far enough down to touch the ground and produce significant fallout. So we're looking at a ground burst because we think what will be interesting is to deal with the fallout rather than just the explosion itself. It makes it a little bit more interesting, a problem, challenge. But these are the kinds of things that we can play with when we get to the modeling and experimental phase. And now the target, we've already selected New York City. So this is not New York City, this is an artist's conception of what a weapon would look like. And I don't think this is a neighborhood of 5 to 10 kilotons. I think this is a little bit bigger. So let me talk about the effects. And some of these terms are not normal everyday language terms, so I'm going to try to translate and make sense out of some of them. A nuclear weapon releases an inconceivable amount of energy, and I think I know what that word means. And I'm going to try to put it in context. What is an event that releases a large amount of energy that we might possibly have experience with? I don't have good, it's very hard to calculate energy related to earthquakes.
Storms.
Some storms. So a tornado, of which we have 1,000 of them in this country per year, 1 kiloton weapon is approximately 116 tornadoes. Average sized tornadoes, 5 scales or something like that, a scale of 5. 1 kiloton, 116. So 10 kiloton is in the neighborhood of 1,000 tornadoes. And that's all happening in seconds, not spread over hours. 90% of the energy is produced in seconds, and the other 10% comes down or comes out over hours, and it's potentially lethal for days. Have I got your attention, Jen? This was the first hydrogen bomb explosion, approximately 10 megatons, 1,000 times what I'm talking about. This occurred before I turned 3, 1952. Okay, the energy is released in a wide variety of forms, some of which we are familiar with, at least from television, and some of which we're not. There's a fireball, a plasma, I'm going to get in trouble with a physicist. There is a fireball in the center of it that vaporizes, breaks down all the matter down to its atomic level, and that's measured in meters from, or kilometers, based on the size of the weapon. There is a blast that goes spherically out from the bomb, or from the explosion. If you're on the surface of the Earth, it's a hemisphere. If it's in the air, it's spherical, it goes out. If it's in the air, it goes down, hits the Earth, and reflects back up. There's prompt radiation that will penetrate everything at a distance, but it decays over the square from the point source that it starts. There is light and thermal energy, and this is where it starts to get strange. I'll explain this a little bit better. This is somewhat of a surprise to me. It can light trees on fire at kilometers from the weapon going off. The tree just burst into flames. Because there is so much energy going out, it goes to flammable material, poof, gone. On fire, rather, not gone, fired. And then it talked about 10% of the energy is coming out as delayed ionizing radiation. I'll describe that a little bit more. Okay, this one shows, this, again, another artist's conception, but it shows the idea that there's a boundary, there's a distance from the original source, it's going out, and this line is moving, and the original blast starts out supersonic and goes out a large distance, and the question is, how much overpressure is there felt on one side of a building or one side of a person compared to the background stuff? And it doesn't take very many pounds per square inch to knock people over or do much worse things to them. So radiation contamination are terms that we associate with nuclear weapons, and we are not altogether comfortable with what those terms mean. Radiation is like sunlight. It's coming out as electromagnetic waves. It also includes some particles. It penetrates nearly everything very close to the source, and it gets weaker as it goes farther out. Effects are burns, and radiation in general damages DNA, besides the burning part, damages DNA and kills cells basically throughout the body. So radiation sickness is sort of scaled like the flu. What percentage of your cells are dead? Is it something you can survive from or not? The cells that are changing more frequently are more susceptible to being interrupted or having their living cycle interrupted by radiation that damages DNA. The first effects of radiation sickness are potentially burns and throwing up. Not terribly healthy. My note is, do you guys realize that some Americans during the eclipse just recently actually put sunblock in their eyes? Okay. On the contamination side, contamination is you can't make these stories up. Contamination is the dust, is particles that are giving off radiation. So radiation is, think of the sun and suntan and sunburn, and contamination as the dust that is giving off that kind of radiation, or the objects that are giving off that radiation. It can be a source, a point source. When the weapon first goes off, it's a point source going off in all directions. But when the contamination comes down to the ground, it's now a surface, and it's an entire field. Basically, at the same radiation is at the same level above the particles that are on the ground, the dust. I think I have it mentioned on the slide. Nope. Okay, so let me talk about radiation versus radioactive fallout dust. Radiation is electromagnetic waves. You may be able to shield yourself and be hidden in a shadow of that. The particles, radioactive materials, are, let me make them into simple two different things. If it's a gas and it's around you, you can't put a shield between you and it because it's going to come around the shield. You breathe it in, but you also breathe it out, so you don't accumulate it. If it's dust and you take it in, it deposits, it accumulates. And so now you're adding it up continuously through the process. So radiation is a one-time, you're exposed to it, or if you're continuously exposed to it, it's an exposure. Contamination is an accumulation.
So just a quick question on that.
Sure.
So the dust version.
Yes.
So we're just talking about particles that are carrying an extra charge? Is that what the radiation
No,
is? What are they
it's
carrying?
not. They are unstable atomic material.
Isotopes?
Isotopes, yes.
Okay.
Our air is mostly nitrogen,
Yeah.
80% nitrogen. If irradiated, radioactive nitrogen, instead of being N14, can be all the way up to N16. I don't think it goes above that, but
Yeah.
N16 gives off a 100 MeV gamma, which is a highly energized gamma ray, and you can get a lot of radiation from, you can get a lot of biological effects from nitrogen being radioactive.
But presume, and again, I don't want to
Go ahead.
get into
No.
the physics just in case we bore people. But presumably a lot of these isotopes will be heavier, not lighter.
Yes.
So does
So
that,
that's why they fall out.
so they fall on the ground. So if would one tactic, for example, be to avoid the fallout, would be to get on the 3rd floor of a building, for example?
I'd go for first floor, because it's going to accumulate on the roof. It's going to radiate in
Oh,
all
that's right.
directions.
Okay.
So the deeper you are from the open air, the safer you are. The less radiation you're going to get.
Cool.
Okay, so some units. In contamination, we normally talk about curies and microcuries. There's my gas and particles. Okay. Curies is, go to the units. Quick effects, accumulates in the body, concentration in the body. You've heard about reactor, our power plants, our nuclear power plants, and iodine tablets. The issue there is that when you break uranium into in half, or close to half, it never breaks, almost never breaks directly in half. It breaks either with atomic numbers around 85 to 90 or around 130. Iodine 128 is a radioactive form of iodine, and your body concentrates it in a relatively small place of your thyroid. So the reason you take the potassium, the iodine tablets, is to put in your body excess iodine that your body concentrates so it would not concentrate anymore, any radioactive material, and you just flush it through. So it's almost like breathing it in and out. But if you had lots of iodine concentrated in your thyroid, you have a problem with your thyroid. We deal with that. That's a relatively, not common, but it is an effect that we know how to deal with. The radiation limits on your body are based on how sensitive those cells are and some interesting human politics. We set a relatively low level of acceptable radiation for reproductive parts of our bodies and our faces. But some parts of our bodies can take relatively high levels because they're not changing radically, and we used to give each other fairly high doses of radiation to do a chest x-ray. We've figured out how to lower those. We used to give 3 times the annual limit in one chest x-ray. We've gotten better about that. Okay, so I mentioned curies. Curies are a measure of the quantity of radioactive material. And you're going, where's the agent-based modeling? We'll get back to that. So a curie is a whole bunch of disintegrations per second. And like frequency used to be cycles per second and then it became hertz, curies are now measured in becquerels, which are disintegrations per second. Okay. Here are the 3 R's: Rankines, Rads, and Rem. Rankines are a strength of the source of the radiation that's going off. Rads are that radiation depositing in the body. So there can be radiation and it may pass right through you and have no effect. If it deposits its energy in you, that's a problem. So these two are separate measures for most of the radiation that we're going to be talking about. They're effectively nearly equal. And REM is the Rankine equivalent in man. Now it's in a human body, what's the effects? You will see measures talking about R or RADs or REM, and they're basically a 1-to-1 ratio. And those are the units that I won't say raised with, those are the units I was trained on. But they're not metric, they're not the SI units. The SI units are grays and sieverts. And they are a direct calculation, a simple ratio to these, but it's not a simple ratio that works for me. In that this is joules per kilogram as opposed to ergs per gram, and 1 sievert is effectively 100 rem. So I try to make those calculations to go back and forth. So doses and outcomes. If you get 3,000 rem, you're going to be dead. And it's going to be quick. That's 30 of those, whatever those units are. Think of, 30 of them. 3,000 rem. 1,000 rem is fatal in 2 to 14 days. That's a reasonably wide range, yes, because people behave and respond differently to radiation. 1,000 rem. 500 rem, 50% plus or minus 30, and I'll show you why I put plus or minus 30. Your 50% chance of being dead without medical attention in a couple of days. I'm going to draw circles that show the 500 rem line. These are the range of numbers that our first responders are given as acceptable for saving a human life. In the Navy, I was taught 100 R one time in your life to go save somebody, or valuable equipment. I never was sure what that meant. First responders are now told they can go up to 250. But that has a chance of increasing their effect. Some people will not do well with that. 5 rem per year is the US limit, which is why the chest x-ray at 15 is 3 times the limit. That's the legal limit for radiation workers. And to put it in context, this is what a CT scan gives you, is approximately 1. The others are now down around 1/10. A chest x-ray is down around 1/10 of a rem. And this is average annual background throughout that we're all getting, and we have been getting for however long you've been alive. And we can't correlate that with increased cancers. We can't correlate this with increased cancers at 5 rem per year for your entire life.
Those of us who were alive in the 60s, we got some bikini fallout and stuff, didn't we?
Yes, we did have some fallout that came into the US. I don't think it was Bikini Island. There were some underground tests that leaked and spread some contamination across the Midwest. If you make a if you make a high altitude flight, you can pick up 100 millirem. If you, no, I won't go that direction. If you live in a city, you pick up more than you do in the country, because radium is naturally found with cement, with the sand and cement. If you watch TV too close, did your parents complain about? Yeah, you get a little. It's getting down to be a very small number. Airline pilots, crews get more radiation than the rest of us. This is a curve in English and in French. It's in Wikipedia. And this is the mortality rate. This is mortality from 0 to 100%. And this is effectively, I've talked in REM, RAD and R, and this is 500 and this is 1,000. So at 500, if you get medical treatment, you're in the 25 to 30% kind of expectation for mortality. But if you're at 500, you could be as high as close to 80%, which is why I said 50% plus or minus 30% at 500. But 1,000, basically dead.
What's the, how do you die from the 3,000 rem?
I would suspect that most of the thing that is causing you at 3,000 rem is burns. You don't have time to develop flu symptoms.
But yeah, but it's not like some kind of biological, it's not like your blood cells literally explode or anything like that, right?
No, but the red blood cells are a very sensitive to radiation component of us. And we have blood problems, infection problems from the smaller doses, which is the difference between the medical treatment and non-treated, primarily. The burns are in there as well. Okay, so after the bad news, if you're trying to survive, the big thumb rules are distance, time, and shielding. Distance, be as far away as possible. I said be because you had to be there when the bomb went off. If you're dealing with fallout, you want to get away from the fallout. It drops off by a square root, so get away. Time, I've talked about 500R and 1,000R. The radiation levels associated with fallout are measured in things like units per hour. So if you're in a 500 per hour and you're there an hour, you got a 50% chance of dying in a couple of days. If you're in a 10R per hour, you got a little time to get away. 10 Rs, you got 10 hours before you would even get 100R. So you can leave. The guidance, most of the guidance that I read, and it's different all over the place between FEMA and CDC and other sources. Basically, it is get inside a building with some shielding, stay there until you find out what the radiation level is outside, because we can't sense radiation directly. So you don't know if it's 100R per hour outside and you get time to run to another building, or if it's 1,000R per hour and you really don't want to be out there. And then shielding, deeper inside the building, potentially underground, things like that. Okay, so that's the motivation, the physics, the explanation behind it. So now let's get back to the agent-based modeling. New York City, Manhattan Island, Midtown. If we targeted there and dropped a 10 kiloton weapon, or set off a 10 kiloton weapon in a truck, there's a bunch of rings here. The smallest at 200 meter radius, 400 meters across, is the fireball. If it's more than, if it's on top of, no. If it has any solid material within that 400 meters, it's a dirty bomb, it's going to have fallout. So we're talking a very small area. That area, 400 meters across, is gone, vaporized. It's not there anymore. It's now particles and dust that's going to be coming down. This out here is the blast zone of 20 pounds per square inch overpressure. That will knock over steel reinforced buildings. And that goes out to 400 meters. This one out here is the 5 pounds per square inch. Will knock down non-steel reinforced earthquake-proof buildings and significant damage. So we're talking from here to most of the way across Manhattan is going to be rubble. The big part is coming down. And what I missed mentioning is that 90% of the people who die from a nuclear weapon don't die from the radiation. They die from the blast and the heat. That's the physical, kinetic, it's going to kill us. This out here is the edge of minor damage to buildings. We're still talking enough to do damage to routine buildings. And the 500 R per hour is out here. And we talked about how soft that edge is. It's not a sharp edge at 500. Some people will die at 300, and some people will survive at 800. So this is a little softer than these lines are drawn. So basically, Manhattan is cut in half. To be simple.
But are you guys also modeling, what about the energetics of skyscrapers falling down?
We're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I mean, we can say there are no people in this. There are no living people in this. Now we're going to deal with who's damaged, that doesn't sound good, who's injured and would want help if there are people around them who are mobile. So that's going to be a band of people immobile but alive to mobile, alive, and potentially able to help other people. And that's going to be fun to model.
So that drawing is to scale right there?
Yeah.
I just did the back of the envelope. It didn't sound quite right. So basically, help me through this. So basically, the red band, right? So that's the 400 meter.
Yes. Those people are no longer exist.
Right. But so 400 meters is a quarter mile.
Yeah.
So a quarter mile is 1,300 feet. In New York City, there's 10 blocks per mile, right?
Yes.
So you're talking about like only that's 10 blocks. Right? It's 1,300 feet.
Don't say only though, but yes,
No,
it's
right.
10 blocks. It's 10 blocks that is no longer there.
So is that radius or diameter? It's radius.
Radius. Correct note. 200 is the radius. 400 is the diameter.
So Manhattan's a lot wider than 10 blocks, though.
Oh yes, yes.
So the red is just it's drawn. It's too wide.
This is a half mile across by 2.5.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the red throne should be a quarter mile. You said 400 meters. That's why I was asking.
400 meters is the air blast. The fire is 200 meters radius. The air blast, 20 psi, is 470 meters radius.
That's not a quarter mile. That's not. It should be narrower than Central Park then.
Yes, it's narrower than Central Park. That is gone.
Right.
The damage to buildings falling and fires. There will probably be fires out here as a result of the thermal at that distance. That goes out to practically to the edge, based on the overpressurization. A little more comfortable?
I have a
Here's the.
question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So when you say the mobile people who could help immobile
Yes.
people, could those people who were injured be contaminated and then basically contaminate others?
No.
I don't know how it works. So
They're not covered by dust. They've been exposed to radiation. They've been
So
hurt.
they won't, okay.
But what we are telling our first responders, what I was told in the Navy, is if somebody gets irradiated, they're not re-radiating.
Okay.
The energy is deposited and it hurts them, but it doesn't go on to hurt other people. Provided they're in the damaged area, not the now part of fallout. Yes?
What about panic? Even
We
after
haven't got to behaviors yet. I'm still in the, I'll get there.
What
Here's
people want, man.
they want panic. Show me the panic. This is let me go back one. If you'd like to go play more with this, that's what to go search for. It's been updated. There's a new Nuke Map 2. They have a Nuke Map 3D, and you can put this in any city, and they will show you what the effects are. You can put it in your backyard. You put your neighbor's back. You can play with the size, airburst, ground burst, all those kinds of things. Okay, so here's the fallout from this. This in here, they're getting 1,000 R per hour. That's the fallout, that the heaviest of the materials that comes down the earliest, 1,000 R per hour. This line, the second layer, is 100 R per hour. You certainly don't want to be in there. And there's an echo of it up there. And out farther is the 10 R per hour, and that goes out for quite a ways. And this is presuming that the wind is blowing in this direction at 15 miles per hour constantly. And when you're starting to think about which way you would run, do you know this? Do you know which direction the wind is? No. So swing this around and pick a direction, and people are going to react. This nuke map system projects that 250,000 people for a 1 kiloton, 250,000 people will be dead, fatalities. And I can't scroll. And I think it was 330,000 people injured. 250 dead, 330,000 people injured for 10 kiloton in New York.
It's dead in the first day.
Yes. Many of them in the first seconds and then over the first day. Okay, so here's our study area. This is where we're going to model people, individuals. It goes into Connecticut and into New Jersey, and I think we kept Pennsylvania out of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We just didn't want to get to other major cities to have to worry about.
He's really saying that he doesn't care about Pennsylvania.
No, I have friends in Pennsylvania. So this is our overall approach and intent on this. We did a literature review. We are synthesizing the environment. We're synthesizing the population. We want the people to be able to move, to be able to react to this weapon. And before I get to the other side, these colors were where we were at the 1 year mark. We had finished a literature review. We hadn't finished writing it up. We had synthesized the environment for part of it, and I'll just show that more. We have synthesized the population. I'll discuss that a little bit more. And movement, yeah, we've just sort of started. So this year, we're going to get into patterns of life, put in the nuclear weapons effects, and then try to get a run by June timeframe of the first minutes, hours, days. I'll talk a little bit about validation because we're already doing it as we're going along. And one day we'll get into playing with different targets, different weapons, different levels of civil defense preparation. We could model different effects. Andrew and I have talked to the Army Science Board, and they realized we don't teach people civil defense anymore. Haven't done it for decades now. So, to synthesize our environment, we started with the road network. And you guys have cars, and you have GPS, and you have smartphones, and you can go anywhere, and it can give you directions. So try to find that data available publicly and put it into your model. Doesn't seem to exist. We collected map information, and the roads were not connected. Everything was in little tiny segments. Our agents couldn't run across them. We spent quite a bit of time connecting the roads together or breaking them apart when they didn't connect and they crossed. So we went through the effort to clean up shape files to get them into a single connected network. We then we'll create living spaces and workspaces and schools. We'll create individuals, and I'll go through some of this, create individuals, put them in those places, other schools, workplaces, etc., and then build the social networks among the people. So again, here's our big area. These are 2 counties about 100 miles north of Manhattan. Manhattan is its own county. These lines are census tracts, which are within a county. So there's those 2 counties up there. We had a fully connected road network with some little hiccups, some challenges about roads that only connected to people in the next county. Made interesting choices we had to deal with. This is the same 2 counties, but now this is the population density by track. And you can see that there are a lot, because you can't see the line goes up there and down here and here. Those are the low population density up to the high population densities. And you see that guy? No. Okay, we'll get to him. That seems out of order. We'll come back to that. No, we won't. Okay. We did the road network for the whole county. We're going to try to I'm going to talk through synthesizing the population and the workplaces, etc., for a census tract. That one right there. In the process, yeah, there's our census tract. I'm going to go back, fix my slides. So after we connected the roads, we then needed to figure out where people live, where they work, where their kids are in school. The schools, the source of data on schools in this country is FEMA. I'm not sure why, but FEMA is the source for the coordinates for school systems. And every state and many of the counties within a state have totally different school systems. So we dealt with pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and all the variations all the way up through high school. So the locations, these red circles are schools, and those are based on actual FEMA physical location. The houses are separated uniformly over the residential roads, and we produce as many houses as we needed for households. We have that from the census data. The places of business we put at intersections on residential roads and on secondary roads, because we did not go through the effort of figuring out where all the workplaces are. Okay, so.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
And was there some evaluation done to say you don't want to look at things like sport arenas, retail shopping centers, other places people?
We are starting with their normal pattern of life during a work week. So we've got home, school, work. We are later going to add places where they congregate and where they play and where they eat and things like that. But right now we wanted some areas where they move to. Okay. With the population information, we can synthesize a population that matches the statistics available on the actual population, so that we have a synthesized population not dealing with real people. So here's an example. This red is a fully connected family network. There's a male 47, a female 45, and 2 daughters age 8 and 3. We built a social connection for them that the father has a workplace with 2 other people, 60-year-old and a 24-year-old. And the mother works out of the home and is connected to these other people. And the children are in schools and are connected with other people in their schools and or daycare. So we can build a beginning of a social network based on just those 3 factors, and distribute it and flesh that out to the entire track. The colors of male and female and the population numbers, and the links between them are based on whether it's because of their school, work, or neighborhood.
And what kind of network did you end up with?
I'll show you some of the statistics. Boom. Total degree has this kind of a distribution. Household is this. We said that less than 5, we would fully connect, and more than 5, we would do the 2 names hyphenated together, a random network. And we have the stats on what's the probability of a connection at a distance and things like that. But we invented those. We don't have data. If you have data, it would make our lives more difficult. But we synthesized the social networks. Now let me go back and see what those other charts were. In creating the population, the synthetic population, we had to use some heuristics to flesh out some of the information that we didn't have available from the census data. So we got ages in 4-year bands, so we can uniformly distribute the ages of our synthesized people in that band. To build a household, we figured that the age difference between the parent and wife should be in that kind of a range, that fathers shouldn't be more than 50 years older than their kids, mothers probably shouldn't be 40 or so years older than their kids. That if we have, in a sense, leftover kids, we put them in households that already have kids, because of the 11 different types of households, there is mother and father without kids, mother and father with kids under 18, fathers with no kids, fathers with kids under 18, mothers with no kids, females with no kids rather, mothers with kids under 18. And that's only, I think, 5 that I've gotten to, because they also break out by single 65-year-olds of both sexes and a couple of others that I can't come up with right now. 11 different types of households. When we went through that, we had leftover adults, in a sense, leftover. We hadn't figured out where to put them. So we put them in the households, and we called them relatives. But they're basically children over 18 who haven't left the household yet, or they are aunts and uncles. But that's where we put the people so that everybody is somewhere. However, we invented a 12th type of household, and I'll show you why. This is, for the 71 tracts in those 2 counties, the percentage difference in the census data compared to our synthesized. You would like it to be 0. Okay, so most of them are around 0, and you might notice somebody up here at 120% or so different from what we had. And we wrestled with that, and we said, where is that? And we looked at the data and found out that the State University of New York has a campus in that county. And there's a whole bunch of people living there. Okay, where did they show up in the census? And are they recorded back home? Are they in this? So we added a 12th household, which is bunches of people. It's either a military barracks, it's a hospital, or it's a college or something like that. So that we could play with that kind of data.
When you guys did this, Bill, did you look at, there are 3 or 4 research groups around that purport to provide accurate synthetic populations for geographically specified areas?
We're competing with them. I know they're out there,
okay,
but we haven't compared notes yet. Where we are with this effort is we have a paper submitted to CSSSA, and I already tweeted that we submitted it and got Andrew complained. And I should have complained. But when we have something, then we can start sharing it with our compadres. And
Bianca, Vision Tech has one, right?
Yeah, they do.
Do you have social networks in this group?
It's the simulation lab, and they do have a version that has networks. I don't know.
A simple version.
we will go out and compare ours to others. Okay, so let me see. Okay. So, if this doesn't creep you out, I'm not sure what will. This is the 2 counties, the households and the individuals that we've synthesized moving on the road network, and you start to see some congestion as they form on those roads. To talk at Manhattan, that's one model. We're doing one model at full scale over the entire 25 million people in the area surrounding New York. But we're also looking at a smaller area in here, something like 1 kilometer on the side. This is what the available information looks like with points of interest, subway entrances, water. This is the edge of Central Park, and our model at this scale, okay, has agents that divide at intersections and then start moving through each other at different speeds along the highways. This is going to be made a little larger because this scale won't quite cover the range of a 10 kiloton weapon. This would be nice if we dropped a 10 kiloton weapon in here and we only considered that 200 meter radius blast area. But for the radiation, most of these people are going to be dead. Or the blast effects, most of these agents are going to be dead. But we are planning to split this so that we have lanes going in opposite directions, so we can get to sidewalks, so we can get to individuals, they can go into the subways, things like that. I mentioned the validation that we did with the population. We'll do it more as we go. Our agents' behavior, to start to get on the behavior, right now we're only looking at having them move between those 3 different places. So work, home, school. We have the distribution of the, wrong way to say that. A household may have children who have to go to different schools. We'll have to figure out whether or not they take the bus, whether a parent drives them, whether the parent goes from home to daycare to work to daycare home, and all those kinds of things, all those options. That is still to be modeled. So in the first year, we did our literature research, collected stories about how people behave in disasters, came up with methods to synthesize this, advanced 2 students to candidacy. And in this year, we're planning to scale up from the 2 counties to the entire region and scale down so that we can get down to pedestrians and individual cars that don't pass through each other. Try to model some normal behavior of moving back and forth between work, school, and home, and start instantiating the stories, the verbal models we have of how people behave in disasters. To give you an idea of what that is, those things are, if you've seen the television, the videos in the last couple of days of how people are reacting in Texas, you'll see people standing in line to volunteer. What our research is finding is that people are amazingly pro-social during disasters. They behave well. Those who have been through elementary school and they lined up for fire drills. We follow instructions. We need somebody to tell us what to do. We will follow anybody who behaves as if they have a good idea. We need to model the nuclear weapons effects, and we need to try to run for the first couple of hours or so. We also, as the question was, we know there's a lot more information about where people hang out, not just sporting events, but other entertainment centers. And this is an idea of what it looks like in Manhattan for entertainment and recreation areas. So we're planning to add that in. And I've only talked about where people live and commute to in those counties. This is an idea of how people commute into Manhattan. The population of Manhattan doubles during the work week from something like 1.3 to 2.5 million people. And they come by all forms of transportation. And we've got to get to modeling that so that we have more people in there. buses, ferries, rails, subways, cars. It's interesting how they are in different groups, color-coded. So, 4 o'clock, 1 hour. Woo! Like I knew what I was doing. Other questions? Yes?
What was the purpose of modeling Sullivan and Ulster County versus?
We wanted to develop the methods to synthesize the population, connect the roadwork, etc. We wanted to start somewhere. Picking those 2 counties, they had relatively lower populations, so we could do it on a laptop in real time. Develop the methodology. That methodology is Python code that goes through and makes transformations of publicly available databases. And the paper that we submitted gives a link to that Python code, a notebook with the steps to go through it.
And then one other question is, what time are you figuring on detonation?
I didn't pick that option. It seems that from terrorists that between 8:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning is the time to blow things up.
Well, the reason I ask is that's exactly it, because when the towers dropped, the death toll was 3,500, but had they waited 2 hours, he said the death toll would have been in the tens of thousands.
The 2 buildings held 25,000 each. And in the 40 minutes between when the plane went in and the first one came down, people evacuated. They were told in the second building to stay. But when the second plane came in, some of them overrode that instruction and started leaving. If everybody had been there, it would have been. Now I'm back up some more stats. 95 to 97% of the people below the impact point of the aircraft got out of the building. People above, not so lucky. And there's stories of people being carried down tens of flights of stairs by people they don't know. There's also apparently some floor that was just covered with high heels. I don't quite understand that. Where people said, "Oh, I don't need to take my high heels with me," and they left them there. And speaking of people lining up and following the guidance from elementary school fire drills, everybody went on the right-hand side down the escalator and allowed the first responders up, not the escalators, the stairwells, and let the guys going uphill with heavy bags to take the shorter inside route. So, yeah. Yes, sir?
You mentioned behavior where going from home to school and back.
Yeah.
And
Our point is
to work
we
out
need to
there.
figure out where people are at the time of the explosion. And that affects, will they go through a radiation area, fallout area, etc., to pick up their kid at daycare because they really want to be with their family members?
So I guess the question is, what additional behaviors are you thinking of modeling?
That kind of behavior.
Because that seems the interesting part of the
Yes.
model would be the behavior.
Without approval of an IRB, because I wasn't planning to collect any data, at the Department of Energy, we had a need to be prepared for disaster at the building on Independence Avenue. And I got permission to try something. So I arrived late at the staff meeting, quite agitated, and said 2 bombs had gone off in the metro and that we are under attack again. The room erupted. People were trying to call their family members to find out if they were okay, report that they were okay, and we could not calm them down for tens of minutes. This is exactly what would happen, etc. So, seems like from a sample of one sad experiment, non-experiment, that people really need to connect with their family members. And they want to actually be with them. They want to go to them. And we don't, it'll be interesting to hypothesize and continue looking to see if we can get data on how far people will go, put themselves at risk to join their family members. And we have some of that data from some of that information from some disasters. of people driving through blizzards to get to other people, and tornado and hurricanes. I didn't point out, one of the things I left out was my 10 kiloton comparison to tornadoes. To get to a hurricane, of course, none of us actually see a hurricane. We only see the people around us, or a mile or two in all directions. So you don't see the whole hurricane. A normal size 3 scale, category 3 hurricane or so is in the order of 10 megatons. 1,000 times bigger than what we're talking about. Yes, sir.
So, kind of going along with the question of the
The behaviors.
Because that would be the
That'll be the fun part.
That'll be the cool
Stay
part.
tuned next year.
You're being a tease, Bill. Now, specifically the social networks, you're taking the
Yep.
paradigm that you're gonna the behavior is gonna revolve around the kinship networks.
Yes.
So if that's the
Well,
case,
wait, excuse me. One additional background that you need to know. Besides their familiar kinship networks, people, if they are unable to communicate, pick up their immediate cohort around them,
yeah.
either work-related or just physically near them, having been through the same experience as their family.
So the electronics blast is how many miles around this epicenter of the?
You don't get a significant EMP with a ground burst. Only 1% of the energy goes into the EMP, and the reason to go higher and higher with an air burst is you get into the ionosphere, stratosphere, etc., and you get a much broader EMP.
Presumably, the electrical grid will also be at
Knocked
least
out.
knocked
In-
out, so
in
you
some
can't rely
region.
on. So there'll be limited
Yes.
cell coverage, etc. And the chances are you're absolutely right. People will be talking to their immediate
Right.
people that are in immediate proximity. So if that's the case, networks essentially, at least within a certain radius, networks go out the window, kinship networks go out the window, because you're
Yep.
dealing with people that are within your physical proximity. And in that case, are you just left with either coalescing behavior or spreading out behavior? People are either gathering in like a stadium together for safety and for communication, or they're just doing their own thing and running all over the place?
When you say gathering in a stadium, that takes coordination and time.
Or just following the leader?
Yeah, but why would you go to a stadium? On 9/11 in DC, people walked across bridges to go back to Crystal City, or to get far enough away that they could find transportation. They walked in one direction. And now somebody had asked about one or multiple weapons and panic. Your question, panic. One of the reasons for picking a small 5 to 10 kiloton is if a weapon goes off in town, Manhattan, or some other place, you will get a pretty good sense of where it is fairly quickly. Flash, everybody pointing, whatever. You'll have a sense of where it is. And if you know where it is, you know where to go away from, if there's one.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a second one, now there's a whole different deal. And that's when we can get into potentially panic behavior. But the psychologists, sociologists don't like to use that term, because when they go in and study it closely, it's rational behavior. Except in the really tight, small group, when people go to self-preservation and they will climb on other people to try to get out. That's rational, not nice.
You gotta be careful with rational though, Bill, because it's, when the stock market falls by a lot, it may be rational to jump out the window too, but.
Well, we've sealed them all, and we don't let people jump in. Yes. Okay. Yes, sir.
First of all, Dr. Kennedy, thank you for the talk, and thank you for having me come here. So I think this is really fascinating research, and I have a suggestion for another question you can do with this. Now, I should want to preface this, that I wrote this question up to DITRA a couple of years ago as a white paper.
Yes.
And they were not interested in this.
I've done a couple of those. They have a couple of levels before the white paper. You can send in an abstract, no more than 200 words, of an idea, and they will tell you it's bad. And when they tell you it's bad, then they're free to tell you what they really wanted. and then they ask you to submit a white paper, and then they tell you that's bad, and then they'll tell you what they really want, and eventually they might ask you to propose. This project, we didn't talk to them in advance, we just responded to the RFP, and they 6 months later said, no thank you, and we said, oh. And 4 months after that, after the 6 months, so 10 months later, they said, we'd like to talk to you. And we go, okay. They showed up and said, do you still want to do it? We said, yes. And what did we say we were going to do? And the money showed up 2 weeks later. So yeah.
So the question is the effect of information.
Yes.
So we have smartphones, right? So
We do if they don't get hit
if
by
they don't
EMP.
crash, yes. But so smartphones have a lot of interesting applications. So one of the applications is there's an app available now which converts your smartphone camera to a gamma ray detector.
I've not heard of that.
Yeah.
I mean, light is gamma rays at a certain frequency energy level.
And it
of different
ionizes
colors.
the sensor on your, it activates the photosensor on your camera. So potentially we could download into people's phone if the cell phone network is working, or if they're first responders who already preloaded this app, then they can basically go around and that was the white paper idea. They could actually act as sensors. They could crowdsource the whole contamination field. This is maybe limited technology. Not every cell phone will support this, but you imagine that people would quickly build up a map of the contamination field. So that's interesting possibility, and this will affect the dynamic in an interesting way. So you could have some people who have this app, and then they sort of feed data, kind of rather underground for radiation. And there are some people who are just users who are basically getting this information through some kind of a website. That could be a very interesting, because it could have a very interesting intervention.
It would certainly help because we can't see the radiation and the contamination and see what the danger is. I'm not sure photoreceptors are going to pick up other than visible light. They're not going to get into infrared. They're not going to get into other things. If I was at Detroit, I would have said that's an interesting idea. Let's go do it.
It's done. I mean, there's a company that actually makes this. Like they have the company that makes an app, and you could download it differently.
I'm not sure I want anyone doing that. I
Well,
want them out of the area.
For $500, you can buy a kit to build a that has a Geiger counter sensor, GPS, and web technology to monitor radiation. It's called SafeCast, and after Fukushima's after the Japanese reactor problem, people surveyed the area, and I'm on a paper that compares their volunteered information with the Department of Energy's aerial scans of the area, and the correlation is very high, and the readings are reasonably good, even though it's amateurs putting together a kit, and the readings are assuming that they're measuring it at 1 meter off the ground, waist level. And that's some big assumptions, but it was very good. $500. Maybe if we get civil defense training, they'll show up everywhere. I have no idea if fire departments have radiation detectors, police departments, don't know.
So there are apps on the iPhone App Store claiming to be working radiation detectors.
Okay.
Yes.
I
I
we need to look
no
into it.
representations as to the accuracy of this information.
Okay. Fake news. I'm going to go back. Yes, sir.
So I saw you work with the road networks.
Yes.
New York City obviously has a significant subterranean
Yes.
infrastructure. Are you factoring that in at all?
We want to get to those other forms of transportation. We're not there yet.
So the way I interpret it was like, you have to subway stations, subway stations.
Yeah.
The traffic flow, and then also first responders.
And the subways will not be able to go through the hole where the weapon was, and we don't know, is there a place where you do that and it shuts down most of the system, or?
Holes where you drop it.
I don't know, we haven't looked into that, those kind of questions.
I was just thinking even the, maybe not even effective, but just the, sort of the sink and sort of the source of people coming out of the
Yes.
underground or back into the underground.
Yes.
Just take over.
Yes, that's why in the zoomed in just south of Central Park, we had we know where the entrances are for the entrances and exit for the subway. Yes, sir.
So once the model is built, what are some of the questions you think you'd like to ask of the model?
One of the questions that the Defense Threat Reduction Agency has said that they want to ask, and it may not work for our model, is how far away do they need to go to set up a staging area? If you're talking megatons, that may be states away. Their question is, do we have to go to Ohio? Can we go to Pennsylvania? Is that far enough? That's the kind of question they're after. The kinds of questions we can ask is how would is there a specific direction for the wind that would be radically more dangerous than others? Or if the wind doesn't stay constant in the same direction for all the time and drops more the contamination fallout locally, is that going to be radically different? Different times of the day. I mean, is the 8:30 to 9 o'clock the window for terrorism, or or is there a better time? And do we want to study that question? Maybe not. We don't want to do targeting efforts for other people.
But there are rescue implications for the time of day. So where are
Yep.
people when you need to go in and rescue them?
And we can play what ifs. What if fire rescue had more bandages for treating burns? Would significantly more people survive? If most of the damage, most of the radiation effects and blast effects are burns in that radius, in that annulus around the thing. We can play those kind of what ifs. We could vary their ability to know which direction the wind is blowing and how that affects the fallout. There's civil defense preparedness. There's lots of questions. What we're asked to do is to characterize the reaction of the population. So we need to do several scenarios to say we generally think it's going to be like this.
Hi, Bill.
Yes.
There's a question from online from Jackie. What about flooding? Aren't parts of New York City under or at sea level? Sounds like the pumps went out.
Yes, New York City needs electricity to keep pumps running, to keep subways from flooding and subterranean passageways from flooding, and we haven't gotten there yet. We know that's a potential area to go explore. Yes, sir.
The question, what you were saying before, is the intent is to map the population's response.
Yes.
Is there, do you think, I'm going to ask you to kind of reach here on this one, but if the weapon was different, if it was a bio or chem weapon where you couldn't necessarily see physical damage, then the time relationship would be much longer to see the effects of the weapon. Do you think the responses would be the same?
I think the responses would be very different. We proposed, one of the ideas I sent them, is that this is a fast disaster. It occurs and people have to react wherever they are with whatever tools, knowledge, etc. that they have. If it's biological, chemical, or some other, it's going to be a slower developing disaster, potentially. And people would be able to prepare, they would be able to potentially evacuate, would be able to take alternate routes and not put themselves in harm's way. And ditchers thought they were already paying for that. And I said, no, we're looking at a fast disaster, not a slow disaster. I think the reasoning would be very different. Would people evacuate. It's the hurricane versus tornado difference. Very different.
Okay.
Okay, we should probably stop and save some bytes.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep.
You should approach Ditcher again because they just changed direction.
They're also reorganizing my PM building.
Yeah, they're in
And he doesn't know if it's good or bad.
I think it's gonna be a shock
I heard
to
the story.
their,
I
yes, their personality, because the alignment for